I'm very happy to have been asked to speak at this celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Danish Cultural Institute. I will not repeat what was said about the beginning of the Institute, the letter from Niels Bohr and others, dated March 1940, just 1 month before Denmark was occupied. Only 2 years after the end of the war, the first foreign branches were established in Birmingham, in Glasgow, in Prague, in Amsterdam, and Zurich. 75 years later, the Cultural Institute is a professionally operated organization with branches in 6 countries. The purpose has not changed. The purpose was not to promote culture as a tool of national superiority or pride. That was an attitude which dominated cultural exchange up to the Second World War. Instead, the purpose was to promote cultural exchange on the terms of culture itself. To form friendships, create alliances, and expand knowledge through the exchange of art and artists. That purpose was reflected in the simple motto or headline, "What can we learn from each other?" That remains the cornerstone of the Institute's work. I personally met quite often with the founding father, Volmar Visti, who invited me to share his lunch bag on the 4th floor, overlooking Copenhagen Harbor. Here he gave me his visions about a Europe of regions. He had the vision that also people without a state, like the Catalonians and the Scottish people, should be free to follow their own ways and means, and in fact, that is an area where the European Union has been successful, because it has made the countries safe and more courageous as to allow different cultures to flower and thrive within the nation-state's border. We celebrate the anniversary at a time where one global crisis is quickly replaced by another. We are not threatened by a Cold War, but the European community is certainly under great pressure with the refugee crisis, with the exit of Great Britain, and also with some forces in the US turning their back on free trade. Border controls, unfortunately, are again separating our nations. Russia is showing its teeth. Turkey is on a path toward less democracy and freedom. That calls for cultural cooperation, intercultural dialogue, and mutual understanding. Art and culture has a unique way of opening doors when politics keep them closed. We have seen that in the excellent work in the Danish Cultural Institute in St. Petersburg. Diplomatic relations may have been difficult. Sanctions threatened the economic cooperation, but cultural activities fell under the radar. And so sanctions did not exclude the celebration of Carl Nielsen last year. Sanctions did not prevent film festivals or performances of the Royal Danish Ballet at the Mariinsky Theatre. That should remind us of the importance of keeping art and culture independent of politics, an arm's length away. Thereby, I'm certainly not saying that culture is irrelevant in our foreign policy, but whereas foreign policy speaks to our rationality and strategic interests, art and culture appeal to our emotions as human beings. It's all about keeping the channels open to the people, even if the door is closed in many ways by governments. We remember and commemorate other countries' great writers, musicians, and artists. We do not remember the diplomats or politicians. Through cultural exchange, we can present our differences in a way that invites others in instead of keeping them out. We can make sure that community and friendship arise in spite of our differences. Cultural institutes play a crucial role to this end. I have seen with my own eyes what a difference a cultural institute can make. In 1990, I had the privilege to open the Danish Cultural Institute in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, located in Riga, at a very critical time for the Baltic states. They had started the separation from the Soviet Union, but certainly not with Soviet blessing. Things could go either way, as we all know. Long before these countries got their independence, we set up the Danish Cultural Institute, set up an institute as sort of a substitute for an embassy, the beginning of an embassy. And we were not seen. We came a whole busload of people from Denmark. We were not seen as meddling after all. It was not an embassy, it was a cultural institute, and that yet we were there, and Rikke Helms was the cultural ambassador for many years until she moved to St. Petersburg. Speaking directly with Baltic writers, artists, and politicians, contacts were created, and 25 years later, the Institute, we can look back at the Institute's many collaborative projects between Denmark and the Baltic states. That is a good example of how culture can establish dialogue and links. Culture can be an extension of politics by other means, and that is not what Clausewitz said. We may call it soft power or cultural diplomacy, but we should remember that art and culture is everything but diplomatic. Art can provoke us, move us, manipulate, be blunt and completely honest, critical and politically incorrect. And we should cherish just that. That makes us reflect on who we are. In Denmark, we are shaped by a variety of local, national, and global events, traditions, movements, and values. I have initiated a gathering of Danish values, cultural values, in the so-called Denmark's canon. The goal is to raise awareness about our historical and cultural values, and to discuss which values we find so important that we must bring them along into the future. The idea is also to enlighten and engage all Danes in exploring our cultural heritage. With the Denmark canon, we take a closer look at the patterns and traditions we believe is most important for our country. Of course, it's at the same time a European canon, because not very much has started in Denmark. We have had influences that has been turned into something Danish. And the Denmark's canon is certainly not meant as something that should describe us as better than others. The idea is that we should be more conscious about our roots and values, and thereby also gain openness toward other cultures. That, in fact, I think, was the ideas on which the Danish Cultural Institute was built by Folmer Visti, Niels Bohr, and others. The artists today, of course, they stand on the shoulders of those who came before them. In 1796, the Danish sculptor Bertel Haarder, my mother liked that first name, he was awarded a travel stipend from the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, and he traveled to Rome. 40 years later, he returned to Denmark as a well-known artist in Europe, and he received a hero's welcome. At the same time, Hans Christian Andersen embarked upon a similar grand tour of Europe. He too returned to Denmark with new inspiration to write his wonderful fairy tales that are still highly appreciated all over the world. Of course, the world was a different place at that time, and the challenges Hans Christian Andersen and Bertel Haarder had to face were totally different from a challenge today. But they have something in common with the artists of today, and that is their starting point, their Danish heritage. A heritage which the Cultural Institute, in a brilliant way, makes sure is known by many culture people and others abroad. And that is why, if we did not have the Danish Cultural Institute, we should immediately invent it, because it is very much needed in these days and in the future. So, warm congratulations and a good celebration today.